Let's go.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the One More Rep podcast. I'm your host. My name is Joseph Percher. This episode is brought to you by NutriBio Supplements and Crystals Bikinis. Today, I am joined by Spencer Moses. Spencer is a coach, a competitor. He has an academic background in biochemistry and kinesiology. Um, so having someone that actually knows their shit in terms of science is a bit of a new thing for the show. Usually it's just a bunch of meatheads talking shit. So I wanted the chance to have Spencer on and kind of pick his brain. So thank you for joining the show, man. How are you?
Absolutely, man. I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Um, all right. So tell me a little bit, I want to get into your background so that the audience is a little more familiar with you at first. And then we're going to dive into kind of the whole world of peptides because they're pretty high. They've been around, I'm sure, as long as we've all been training. And
Mhm.
up until this year, I haven't really given them much interest. Um, and I feel like they're much more mainstream and spoken about now. And so I feel like you're a great person to kind of dive into how it applies to bodybuilding because it seems to me a lot of the people that are discussing the efficacy of some of these peptides are not actual bodybuilders. So I'm always a little hesitant of how it applies to what we are doing. So, with all that said, talk to me about the academic background.
I have a bachelor's in biochemistry from University of North Texas. I graduated back in 2017, and that was a bit of a long effort. But what got me into bodybuilding originally was my uncle, way back in the early 2000s. So I've been around that world for a hot minute.
Yeah.
And I kind of have a bit more of a meathead background. I was a meathead long before I was an academic.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's more of a new effort for me, really. But yeah, he sort of got me into the sport. I actually, as an infant, watched my uncle compete. Well, I can't watched
Yeah.
uh, Ronnie Coleman. It was both their amateur debuts back in 1990. Uh,
Whoa.
and he sort of gave me a little bit more of a crash course in bodybuilding and powerlifting in the early 2000s, whenever I was, a teenager and more of age to pursue that. But yeah, I've been lifting weights ever since then, about 20 years, and um, that very much sparked my interest in biochemistry and
Mm.
exercise physiology. Um, so that played a big role in why I wanted to pursue those fields, because there hasn't been a whole lot of academic rigor involved with those efforts, and I wanted to kind of be involved with you know bringing that bringing some solid science to those fields. Um, so I worked at the Applied Physiology Laboratory at the University of North Texas for about 6 years.
Oh, wow.
We did a variety of different types of work there. I was kind of on the more resistance training team. We had a cardio team,
Oh, very cool.
and we all were involved in each other's projects. So I have a good bit of experience doing like VO2 max testing, doing
Sure.
resistance training studies. We partnered with a lot of different supplement companies to test their products and how well they fared in terms of recovery. Um, with my background, I was able to apply some gene expression analysis to some of those products, which was really, really interesting. We got some really interesting results on some of those. Um, we partnered with some other companies. Like we did some studies like involving Under Armour and testing some of their
Oh, wow.
heat dissipation properties in some of their clothing. And so we worked on a
Yeah.
variety of projects related to exercise physiology, and it was a really, really good program. Sort of kind of went belly up a little bit with COVID. A lot of
Mm.
research, fortunately, kind of got axed with that whole debacle.
That's
Shut
a good
down.
word for it. Yeah.
Lab was shut down indefinitely for like a 9 month period.
Mm.
The
So let me sorry to cut you off, but let me because I didn't even realize that that was the extent of what you were doing. So being on like the resistance training side of seeing some of these like actual studies, what is your take? Because you mentioned too, and this is something that stood out to me. I love to hear this because this is kind of how I fancy myself, where you're like, I'm more of a meathead or I'm more on the bro side of the fence than anything. Um, and that's how I've tried to bend or I've tried to be like I was a bro long before I was ever interested into the actual science. Now I'm not nearly as educated on this stuff as you, and that's why I would love to hear your thoughts on this. So, being that science has kind of been thrown to the forefront of like at least the online bodybuilding industry and community, when you consume and see these pieces of content and these different influencers that make a name for themselves giving like hard statements about anything more than 4 reps is a waste, and you're going to conjure the fatigue monster and all these things. Where do you stand? And it's easy to poke fun at them, but do you feel like there are things that maybe bodybuilders or the pro side of the fence overlooks?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've watched a lot of things that we did in the early 2000s turn out to be, not so, um, not hold up in terms of scientific rigor. There's a
Right.
lot of things that we got wrong, but there's a lot of things we got right. High volume training and that impact on hypertrophy. There's, that's a pretty significant contributor.
Yeah.
Uh, but, I do see a lot of influencers get things wildly wrong, and
Okay.
way that in the way that most lay people read and um, conceptualize scientific data and the way that they apply it is often not appropriate, depending on, are you taking a study that's done on untrained subjects and drawing wild conclusions and trying to apply it to elite level athletes? Because that's not really appropriate. And you don't really have a whole lot of high quality studies on elite athletes. Those are exceedingly rare. Usually you're dealing with really small sample sizes. So there's a lot of limitations to a lot of the studies that are published. And that doesn't mean we should immediately discount them. There's value in all scientific study for sure. But um, some things need to be taken with a grain of salt. And that it's a tough field to navigate, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And then so with your own bodybuilding, because then it just seems to me like, you have a deep understanding of both sides of the fence and then
Mm.
how it might apply from the lab or from a study into what is really working in real life. And there would be no better example of that than what you choose to do with your own training. So how would you, training when you zoom out, I feel like is actually pretty simple, especially when you talk to people that have accrued a lot of muscle tissue the way that you have. Like we all end up kind of in the same ballpark. But if you could describe like the general pillars of what your training philosophy for you individually is like, I'd love to hear it.
I mean, progressive overload rules the day.
Yeah.
But and that can be done with load, that can be done with tempo, that can be done with, um, pauses at either ends of the movement. I typically kind of gravitate more towards a full ROM training approach,
Yeah.
uh, as long as it makes sense within, maintaining a maximal amount of tension throughout the set. Um, that doesn't mean there are certain things as far as like, time under tension that has an impact, but uh, ultimately the time tension time by force is probably your greatest predictor in terms of like hypertrophy outcomes. So don't let time under tension. We dismiss it in scientific study, but it does have its merits in terms of intensity.
Is it,
So
would it be fair to say time under like actual timed a number of time under tension is almost like a byproduct of everything else you should be doing first.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, and if and obviously if it's done with not an insufficient amount of force, that's not going to be sufficient for building a whole lot of muscle. So there's a
Yeah.
give. So that's kind of how I view it within my training. Most of
Okay.
my, I'm looking at trying to fail within, eight to 10 reps, eight to 12,
Yeah.
15, maybe some exercises if it makes sense, especially for something that, you can handle a lot of abuse like legs.
Right.
Uh, so that's kind of the domains that I try to work within, with my
So you're
own.
not doing 4 rep lateral raises, is what you're telling me.
Definitely not. I think that's gone very far. And it's funny to watch some people try to do silly shit like that in the gym.
Yeah.
You can usually easily spot your science-based lifters pretty quickly, and they typically look like it. So,
I
uh,
think a lot of times they're young and they haven't understood or grasped the fact that they're still going to want to do this at a pretty high level of intensity or without any limitation 10 or 15 years from now.
yeah,
So when I get into I shouldn't, but I have these kids that comment on my stuff or I end up getting into arguments with them. And, you know, this doesn't dismiss their argument, but a lot of times they don't look like they've ever stepped foot into a gym. And then they're telling me like anything beyond 4 or 5 is pointless. And I'm like, I understand the point. I understand that you're kind of just filtering your training down to the effective reps, right? But it's like, how are your shoulder joints going to feel 10 years from now if you are doing enough load to truly fail at 4 or 5 on a lateral raise? I wouldn't last a week at this point.
I'm in my 30s now. I can't
Yeah, me
train
too.
the same way I did when I was a teenager, or
No.
time in this sport would be very, very limited. So
Yeah.
I've definitely had to modify things as I've gotten older. And I've had to take a look at some of the scientific data and really, really dig deep and try to see, what is worth extracting here? What can I ignore? What can I apply? And, how do I move forward? And a lot of times that's meant just cranking the volume up and going for more reps because that's what makes more sense for my joints. Because I've got a ton of
Yes.
joint issues on nearly every part of my body at this point. Uh, Part of that has to do with not using such great form when I was a teenager and in my early 20s. I've got a slew of injuries to my shoulder, my knees, my hip. It's been a tough thing to navigate. But thankfully, peptides have made that a little bit easier to handle, especially.
Great segue. Great segue. Let's talk about it.
So I've been using, and I really don't use that very many peptides. I don't endorse very many of them. I am affiliated with the Amino Asylum. I've been using their stuff for, gosh, at least 5 or 6 years now, I think. Um, but the list of peptides that I actually use is relatively short compared to what a lot of companies offer, and I
Right.
do a lot of them. Not to shit on these companies, but 'cause they do provide some value in terms of having access. But I do think a lot of them ultimately boil down to just being expensive water for the most
Mm.
part. And I personally am not willing to be a guinea pig on some compounds without seeing a little bit more data, or at least hearing a plethora of more anecdote
Yes.
encouraging on some of these. The two that I have the most experience with would be BPC 157 and TB 500. I've toyed with a few others here and there, and when we're talking peptides, I'm assuming we're talking about stuff that's not already, a licensed and approved drug. So I'm not talking about like HGH.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
that's a given.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
That has its merits. That's been around for decades, and we've got great safety data on that, and pretty solid outcomes.
Am I wrong in saying insulin is actually a peptide also, technically?
It is technically a peptide. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So again,
Got,
tried and true. We know about that.
yeah.
But this is you kind of segued naturally into exactly what I had in my mind when I thought about like a valuable conversation that you and I would be able to have, especially for people listening, because it's like, okay, this is a guy that lives and dies for bodybuilding 24/7, has done so for a long time, and then is also knee deep in the research in terms of knowing what in real life is actually worth taking, like what's worth the squeeze here. And like you said, no disrespect to any of these companies, it's awesome that they
Yeah.
can source all this stuff because
I'm,
there's
I'm
a different, yeah, there's a different need for everybody, you know what I mean? um but there are so many of them, and you see so much conflicting or confusing information about how to use them. So it's interesting to hear that someone as deep into it as you actually has a pretty condensed list. So talk to me about it. You talked about BPC 157 and the TB. From the outside, I haven't used these. I haven't used TB at all, and I've only used oral BPC, and I used it for my stomach this past off season. And I was skeptical going into it because the way that people online make these two sound, especially if you take them together, I see it marketed as the Wolverine stack, that it makes you Superman, all this stuff, right? So I was skeptical. I took the oral BPC specifically for gut issues, and it was like magic. Within 2 days, I went from barely being able to eat a couple meals to right back to over 7,000 calories, no issue. And it was, I'm not exaggerating when I say that it felt like it was almost miraculous. So, talk to me about your experience with those two, and then if you want to just work down the list of what you have found to be effective.
so I guess I started using BPC. I was actually prescribed it by a physician,
Mm,
compounding pharmacy back in, I want to say like 2016, 2017.
wow.
It's been a while. I've been using that one on and off.
Okay.
That was after I had a bone graft. So I had a non-union issue with my forearm with my right ulna.
Mm,
A pretty severe open compound fracture where I lost a little bit of bone mass in that ulna. And um, so they had to take autograft from the iliac crest of my right pelvis, right side of my pelvis, where they basically went in and they took out a big chunk. It's pretty sizable,
Jesus.
uh, and grafted it into my forearm, which is pretty extreme.
That's extreme, dude. Fuck.
But the choice was between that or potentially not recovering full use of my arm, and I was really, obviously that's pretty critical for bodybuilding and training and whatnot.
Just day to day life. Yeah. Pretty important.
And it's my dominant arm too,
Right.
unfortunately. So, uh, but whenever that happened, that caused some dysfunction, some as far as being able to function my knee properly, and I
Mm,
stretched slash damaged my patellar tendon just like running up a flight of stairs, trying to shortly after that surgery when I thought everything was good to go. Um, I probably could have had a little bit of a better rehab protocol as far as how I handled my hip graft and all that, um, the harvesting and whatnot. But it, uh, yeah, so I did find it remarkably helpful for that as far as dealing with that pain in my patellar tendon. That's
yeah.
an issue that's plagued me still even to this day. It's been going on like about 9 years now.
Wow. Let me cut you off right there. Can I ask you, because I hear that people do like site injections for the injury. Is that what you were doing with this?
Yeah, that was initially what I started off doing. I've played around with it quite a good bit. I've probably gone through, gosh, at least well over 100 vials of this stuff by now.
Okay.
Uh, so I've played with it a good bit. I've mixed it with GH and just pinned it, you know,
Mm,
typical like subcutaneous spot in the, my lower flank area,
right.
uh, on my waist. And I honestly, I can't tell much of a difference in how it, how well it works as far as like localized injections versus, aiming for more systemic, action, doing it that way. Um, but I currently do a good mix of both. If I'm just using it for just general maintenance purposes, if my pain isn't that severe, I'll just pin it, just right there. on my flank or love handle area. But if there's any sort of like ache or pain, serious issue going on, I've pinned it there. I've pinned it to my wrist.
Mm.
Um, and we're talking about subcutaneous shots. I'm not
Yeah,
like
yeah.
cartilage or anything like that. And I'm not that brave uh, shot or anything crazy like that. I don't quite have the stomach to do that, but I've found it helpful in both ways. So if I need a little bit more spot reduction for pain, that's typically the way I'll go. Uh, whatever wheel is squeaking the most, that's the one getting
Right.
the grease, I suppose. So
Okay, right on. That's a good way to put it. And then the TB, what do you find from that? Is that always in combination with BPC?
yeah, and not always. And I've in the interest of just saving money, because this shit is
Sure.
expensive,
It is.
especially going through as much of it as I have. Um, I try to lean more towards the BPC since there is some data that supports that it can accelerate some of the actions of growth hormone by increasing growth hormone receptor sites uh,
Mm.
and accelerating that pathway. And I do find it that it does seem to make GH a certain percentage more effective. I don't know if I could nail it down to a specific number, maybe 5, maybe 10% more. Uh,
Okay.
but there does seem to be some special synergy between the two.
Mm.
I've tried it both with and without GH. And it definitely seems to be more effective with GH, which seems to make sense. You've got a little bit more stem cell proliferation going on with growth hormone. So it seems to make sense. If you've got an injury going on, you want to bring the inflammation down with the BPC and allow the GH to work a little bit faster. That
Wow, that's incredible. That's the type of stuff I brought you on for because I don't know that I've ever heard anyone discuss that. Maybe I'm not in these circles enough, but that's very, very interesting.
Yeah, I've definitely I didn't really find it as effective without being on growth hormone
Wow.
because I that was originally the context when I tried it.
Yeah.
But now that's definitely the way. I definitely prefer to combine the two. I mean, I try to
Okay.
stay pretty much like year round now. Because that seems to do a good job of helping recovery of joints, especially
Mm.
uh, to a certain extent. Like higher doses seem to give me more joint pain, but if I'm not on it or if I drop the dose too low, it's there's a give and take there. Uh,
Okay.
but yeah, that's mostly the context that I've used it for. Uh,
Okay.
I consider BPC pretty much to be like a year-round staple for me. Even if I'm not in any sort of, acute pain or if everything's going good, I'll try to keep it in at a dose of at least like 100 to 250 micrograms per day.
Okay. And what if the knee really aches up on you?
Yeah, and that's happened to me actually pretty recently, about a month and a half, 2 months ago. I missed the rack on pendulum squat.
Jesus.
Was failing, and sort of felt a little bit of a stretch on that tendon, a little bit. It
Yeah.
was comfortable, and to bring inflammation down pretty quickly, I'll crank the dose up as high as 1,000 micrograms a
Okay.
day. Some guys like to split it up. I usually just do it all in one shot at night before bed. Um, I've tried splitting up the dose. I guess if it's really inflamed, there may be some merit to doing that. But I
Okay.
did it all at once just to make things easier for me.
Okay. Talk to me a little bit because I there's so much I want to get to, so I may just cut things a little short
Yeah.
because I want it to all fit. Talk to me about what else is on the list in terms of like PED, like those. I think about those almost as like health and maintenance or longevity, right? And then on the flip side, like you're a competitive bodybuilder. For people that don't know, you competed in 2024, which went back and looked. That was your first show.
Yeah, so I've been around the scene for a while, but because of all these
Yeah.
injuries, kind of kept me from being able to get to stage with a look that I wanted to present.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I started working with Chris Tuttle a
Yeah.
little ago. I finally we got on stage last year in September, and took the first place in
Won the overall for bodybuilding.
all for bodybuilding. So I'm currently getting ready for nationals with
Hell
this.
yeah. Awesome. How, because I saw your pictures. Honestly, I don't know if it was the angle or what. Not to take anything away from you, but you looked, I would have bet anything just from the pictures that you were a super heavyweight. And then I saw that you won the heavyweight and the overall. So how tall are you and what did you weigh on stage? Because you looked enormous.
I am, according to the NPC, 6'1.5".
Okay.
I thought I was 6'1". At least I was in
Sure.
high. I guess I've shrunk a bit. I don't know. Probably these injuries aren't helping too much.
Yeah.
A lot of axial loading from squatting over the
Yes.
couple decades probably compressed some vertebrae or
I
something.
had the same experience. Nobody wants to believe me. I remember getting measured in high school basketball. I was 6 feet tall.
Yep.
I go now and I'm lucky if I'm 5'11 and a quarter.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if you're like losing water from the muscles in the bottom of your feet or something like that. I
Right.
mean, it cut water pretty good going into that show.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
No diuretics, but was down to I
Yeah.
think 1.5 of water a day for like a couple days before weigh-ins. So I just barely made weight for the heavyweight category. Cut off of 225.
Yeah.
Uh, I was 226 right when I
Okay.
started. So.
Awesome. Yeah. Killer look. So, me saying that and hearing also that you're getting ready for nationals is awesome, but it's just like, okay, this is the type of bodybuilder we're dealing with. Like, this is not just a lab guy. Like, this is a guy that's winning bodybuilding overalls. So talk to me about like the performance enhancing or physique enhancing side of peptides. Are there any that are worth doing? And are any of these kind of, I guess, newer ones? And I don't even know if they're technically peptides or compounds, what you'd call them. Do any of those interest you enough to try them?
I mean, there are some that I'm following closely, especially some of the ones that are a little bit more fat loss oriented, like 5-amino 1-MQ, SLU, 33 PP2 or whatever,
Yeah.
89604. Some of those have piqued my interest, but I've yet to try them myself until I
Okay.
have a bit more data on them. Most of the ones that I stick to are just your bread and butter, BPC, TB, and just growth, just large doses of growth hormone. Which I do
Okay.
up on. I've run until, well, fairly recently, I've lowered the dose a couple months ago. But before that, my pretty much standard dose was 12 units a day for the last like 3 years prior to just a couple
Okay.
months. I,
All
I
right. So big question. I'm going to start asking every bodybuilder that I have on here. You're an awesome person to get your answer. Are you using generics or are you using farm?
only generics. I've never used farm GH. I don't have the budget for it.
Yeah. Right.
Just to be frank, it's expensive, even if you're running generics, especially at high doses. Uh,
Yes.
I've I've tested myself. I've tested my blood response at my own lab. I've paid out of pocket to have my IGF-1 tested many times. It's usually very, very high, well outside the reference range. I'm pretty happy with the results I've gotten from generics. I know a lot of
Score one
guys.
for the good guys.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of guys say, "Oh, a farm is the only way to go," and I'm like, "Dude, a chemical is a chemical is a fucking chemical. Like, whether there's some dimer present that could alter its activity a little bit. Okay, maybe you're not getting the most ideal immune response out of that, but GH on its face does a really good job at really invigorating the immune system based on some of the anti-aging data that's come out. There's the TRIM study, that's TRIIM study that
Okay.
was really promising as far as its effects on immunity and
Mm.
its effects on reversing some of the aging epigenetic biomarkers that they'd looked at,
Wow.
uh, adding base pairs to your DNA at whatever the little caps. So how they measured that. Um, it's really promising. I plan to be on GH pretty much until I kick the can.
You and
Um,
me both. They're going to have to put me in the ground before I stop using GH. Now, let me ask you, because I've never heard that data, and I'm not a chemist or a scientist, but as you said that, something clicked in my mind over the past, I would say 2 or 3 years. The only times that I've ever gotten no like very sick
Mhm.
have been when I've cruised and lowered it or removed it completely.
Yeah, same. And I've noticed that effect
Wow.
with peptides as well. For a little while, I was prescribed thymosin alpha 1, which is sort of similar to TB 500,
Yeah.
uh, but that's a pretty potent immune stimulator.
Okay.
Or I skipped a dose or just wasn't or was traveling, didn't have easy access to it. I noticed that I had a little bit more propensity to get sick, and
Man.
being without GH too. The few times I've had like a week or two here and there in the last 4 years
Yeah.
where on vacation or I had some shit happen, moving, whatnot, just wasn't
Right.
able to keep up with it as well as I'd like to. And sometimes you do need a break from it, especially if you're, banging cheat meals or something like that. You probably shouldn't be, loading up on a bunch of GH at night after had a cheat meal or something like that.
Because then the concern is just way overblown blood sugar at that point. Like if
Right.
you're on 12 IU's and you're not super
Especially if
tight
that-
with your diet, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I made that mistake shortly going into my off season before I hired. I remember sending my first check-in pictures to him when I first hired him, and wanting to jump into a show and thinking I could do a 16-week prep. He's like, "Oh no, you need 24 weeks, buddy. We're just gonna
Yeah.
take you get lean."
Now, is that the prep that resulted in you winning?
Yeah, yeah.
Wow, no kidding. Wow.
So that was a pretty lengthy prep.
Man, I
That,
never
I
there's
wasn't like
there's
full bore on all the drugs for the duration of that 24
sure.
weeks.
Yeah, yeah. I was just gonna say, man, there's definitely something to be said, and it's a term that makes me cringe now because of its abuse and overuse. But having someone do a long prep like that, you do need to manage fatigue, and you can't expect them to be at 100% for 24 weeks. But especially with myself and with other people that I help, I am never disappointed in someone's conditioning if they did 20 or more weeks ever.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really feel like I was pretty much ready at like 6 to 8 weeks out.
Right.
Uh, until we got to the final 3 weeks where we dropped my fats to absolute bare minimum.
Right.
I'm really happy with my look for quite a good ways. And fatigue did become an issue. Uh,
Yeah.
so I mean, I had kind of a tired look, which speaks a lot to making sure that your mind and you know on top of your shit in your off season, so that you're not coming in sloppy going into your prep.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
mhm.
almost like that rebound immediately after a show really sets up how well the following year's prep is going to go, because that sets the tone for everything. And like you said, if you're starting from a bad spot, prep is just, even with more time, it's just going to be more difficult. And it you might get there in terms of body fat, but it's not necessarily your best fresh full look.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I
So
was I was
uh,
hammering
go ahead.
eggs twice a week going into
Mm,
that too. So that was just accumulating a ton of fatigue.
yeah.
Uh, but since I'm tall, I had to push
I'm with
for
you. I got 2 leg days in. I'm on a bro split now, and I still am refusing to take the second leg day out because I'm just terrified they're gonna shrink on me.
yeah, I think I'm in a good spot now. We've switched my training up to training him once a week, but because I
Okay.
got some really long femurs that
Yeah.
filled out. So that's
You've
what
done
we
well with them, man. You've done well with them. They looked awesome on stage. I mean, I know you mentioned you felt like you kind of looked tired, but man, that was a big condition look. It would have taken somebody that was fucking serious to get in your way.
I came in pretty peeled. I got a DEXA
Yeah.
scan shortly before I went for weigh-ins and clocked in at about 3.5% body fat. So I was feeling pretty good about that going into the show. It's definitely the leanest I've ever been.
Oh
So
yeah.
that
Man,
was,
I'd imagine that they don't read much lower.
I mean, if they can read as low as,
Will it
low as
go, will it go much lower than that?
it'll read everything. It'll read the fat mass in your brain. So,
Mm,
pick
okay.
brain all you want to have and just you can you can drive that down as much as you'd like. It may not be
Yeah.
the it may not be the best for you, but you can hammer it down.
All right, let me go back because I actually, as part of like all of the questions that people wrote in, people wanted to know about growth hormone. You kind
Oh,
of have alluded to it, but in your
my favorite
ex,
compound under the sun. So one of my, it's my actually my favorite drug. I could quit
okay,
everything. I probably will never stop taking that. So happy to
I'm
answer.
with you. In all of your experience, academic, anecdotal, real life experience, you kind of have alluded to it, but what is your ideal timing, especially if we're talking in regards to off season and growing?
I think it's kind of person dependent. You know, if you're not so lean, you might want to split your dose up more throughout the day so that you can bring in a little bit more of a leaner state, so you have a little bit more fat oxidation going on.
Okay.
It will immediately stimulate the release of fat from adipocytes. But I personally think for growth, it's probably best to just pin it all in one go right before bed and keep it more in line with the body's natural diurnal rhythm, where you get a large pulse of it, typically around 10 or 11 p.m. If you follow like the 24-hour timeline, you get a large pulse around then, and then it's very low, close to undetectable throughout most of the day, unless you've just trained. You do get a big spike after training. That's one thing that we looked at quite a bit during my course of studies that we've done on training. Is there's typically a growth hormone response that isn't so much meaningful for um, growth so much, but I suppose you could make the argument if you're looking at whenever the body's natural spikes are, post training and before bed would probably be the two most ideal times to do it on that timeline.
Man,
But
this guy's you are so well versed that got to my next question before I even could ask it. So I have been for a long time. I've been working as that being kind of the best standard operating procedure is before bed, right? Bolus dose before bed. Same reasoning that you had mentioned. It most closely mimics what's already going on, and then if anything, it almost supercharges it, for lack of a
exactly.
better term. Um, Now, are you familiar with the Gorilla Chemist?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, me and him chatted quite a bit.
Okay. I was
I've
wondering. Yeah.
following him for a good like 10 years or so. He
Yeah.
was actually really, I'm from Dallas where he used to
Yeah.
live. So I've
Okay.
heard him say at like absolute recomp down there. And he actually was, he's a real nice guy. His name's Brian.
Yeah.
Me and that I enjoyed.
Awesome.
Um,
I had kind of I figured you would know him, and I kind of had hoped that you guys had talked because it's like you guys are kind of filling a space that not many other people are in. Yeah,
yeah.
within bodybuilding. But I was going to ask you about, you got to it, but he has actually come out and he's a big advocate for bolus post training.
Yeah.
And so I was gonna see if you had any opposing thoughts, but then you mentioned like, hey, these are the two times that make the most sense. So then it's almost like, to me, it would be then what is most practical for your life? Like, is it practical for you to bring a insulin pin that's stored with a cooler, like while you go train?
Done
Yeah,
that.
yeah. No, I'm doing some right now. So you had mentioned even you were on top of this too, but I'm in a diet right now. I'm doing 15 a day. So I'm doing 3 shots of 5. So I'll do morning and then before bed, of course. And then I was like, okay, when most makes sense for this third shot, and it's post. So I bring like, a cooler and have everything ready to go. But it was interesting to hear you kind of proactively touch on all of those points. Like if fat loss is the goal, it makes sense to have it kind of pulsing all throughout the day. Now, one thing that I picked up on that I thought was interesting, you mentioned and you made it a point to use the word immediately. Are you with that language, are you of the belief that taking it prior to morning or fasted cardio is beneficial? Or I've heard other people say, you're not going to see the benefits of exogenous GH for 2 or 3 hours. So it's really that's pro science
And I've structured it even so that I take it at like I'll set my alarm.
at
I
5 in the morning. Yeah.
morning and then I
Yeah.
naturally closer to 8. So I'd pin it then and then I'd be doing my fasted cardio around when I'd get a peak blood value or a peak response in terms of the free fatty acids in the bloodstream. Just kind of looking at the data on that. Um, But yeah, I mean, I've done it. I've done it 4 times per day before, where I've done it like in the morning before fasted cardio, done some pre-training, post-training, and before bed. I encourage people, if you've got a good amount and you are cranking your dose up, I encourage people to kind of play around with it, kind of see what you like best. I got really good pumps from splitting it up, doing pre and post workout. Um, and I've played with some even higher doses. I think the highest I've gone up to was 24 units a day,
Let me
which
stop you right there.
yeah.
I want to ask, okay, so in that regard, and in general, because I could be way off on this, but you had mentioned your ulna earlier.
Yeah.
Is that in relation to like your ulnar nerve? And if so, do GH doses affect your like carpal tunnel or your hands?
So I'm lucky in that I don't get such a severe response in terms,
Okay. Okay.
but that seems to be highly individual. I don't know if maybe
Yeah.
I've just been on it for long enough that I just don't feel it or notice
You're
it.
it's almost that almost sounds to me like maybe your body has been on it so long, it's learned to stabilize the amount of water that it's accruing because of that. Because I found I've talked about this, people that listen to the show are going to be sick of me hearing me say this, but every time I have someone on, it's a new guest. So in my experience, I tried 15 IUs earlier in the year in the off season when I was at my peak heaviest, highest amount of food, lowest amount of output. Like I was intentionally not doing cardio and I was doing a bolus dose of 15 before bed. And after about a month, my hands and arms were unbearable. I couldn't get more than an hour of sleep at a time. I've found now, I'm leaner, I'm eating less, I'm moving way more. I'd imagine the overall fluid retention is way less. And then I'm splitting the dose 3 ways. I'm unaffected by it on the same batch of stuff. So that's interesting to me. So 24 IUs a day. What did you experience from that? Any sides?
I mean, I had some absolutely absurd pumps during, especially doing like 6 unit pre, 6 units post training, 6 in the morning,
Yeah.
six. That was kind of how I divvied it up for that. But there were sometimes on some occasions where I'd miss my morning session and I would just do 12 pre, 12 post workout. And I enjoyed that too.
Yeah, I bet.
Ultimately just get the fucking drugs in you and
That's it.
get it in a way that you can tolerate it. So if you're having carpal tunnel issues, then sure, yeah, split it up throughout the day. You probably have less of a fluctuation in body water, uh,
Yes.
in the joint capsule or whatever that compresses the nerve, that causes that issue. Um, but if you can handle large bolus doses, I do think that there is some merit to that as far as the effect that it has on IGF-1 output.
Awesome.
Uh,
Awesome. Let's see. So I actually had someone that asked about you had mentioned AOD 9604. No personal use with that though.
no personal use with that. That's kind of that is one that I'm got my sights on. I'm following that one.
Me too. I have some on the way. I don't typically get them from the typical American spots, so shipping's a little slow right now. But I have some on the way. I'm going to try it. I'm interested in it. Any thoughts or experience with GLPs or specifically Retrutitide?
I've coached about a dozen people that have used GLP-1s, none that have used retatrutide, but several that have used semaglutide and tirzepatide. And
Okay.
I think they're fucking phenomenal drugs,
Yeah.
for, especially for the clients I've had that have used them. Both of my parents used them,
Oh,
and
no
they,
kidding.
which I was not super high on that idea at first, but it's hard to argue, the effects of carrying around, a little bit too much body fat or more than you want, as far as your health and lifespan. So I do think that they certainly have their place, especially for more lifestyle oriented folks. I think their application to bodybuilding is really kind of limited because of how much they do crush your appetite. Unless you can find a way, I do think it's interesting. Some guys are microdosing them.
I'm
Who,
microdosing Retrutitide right now, and it's been great for me personally.
Yeah, and I would say if you're competing, that's definitely the way to go is to try to do the more frequent injections. We see that with a lot of drugs. More frequent administration seems to be the way to
Even my
go.
test or my androgens.
Yeah, I do daily shots for
Me
androgen.
too.
I'll coach clients as having them do daily shots or at the very minimum every other day.
Yes, as frequently as you can, right? Like that's what I tell people.
Yeah. But I do like GLP-1s. I personally stay pretty lean, so I don't really have
Yeah.
much need for them. And I really have trouble stimulating my appetite, if anything. So I really need to go in the opposite direction.
So you need to stay away from them.
Yeah, I'm like vaping THC cards. I live in Oregon where that shit's legal, so I can just get away with doing that all day. So I'm
Hell
trying
yeah.
to stimulate my appetite to go the
Yeah.
opposite direction. But
Your your mention of like lifestyle people too is that these drugs were created for diabetics originally. So it's like, and to me, it just seems like if I zoom out away from bodybuilding in general, insulin resistance seems to be like public enemy number one in terms of creating disease states. So this stuff is, I'm fascinated by it, truthfully.
I think it should be broadly available without a prescription, and the price needs to fucking come down
Oh
on
my
the.
goodness, dude, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, my mom got put on it for, and her insurance covered it at first, and
Mm,
it was effective for her. And then, oh, you're no longer obese, so you don't need this anymore. And then they no longer covered it, and the cost was like going to be like a
two
thousand.
grand a month. Yeah,
Yeah, I was like, this is fucking ridiculous. The way that they yo-yo people around on insurance
I
with some
know.
of that, a whole other can of worms. But yeah, the geo, but they're really good drugs. I'm really disappointed to see a lot of guys shitting on them, because it's bringing people into the fold for exercise that otherwise can't get there. And the cost of obesity is so much greater than the minor potential side effects that you get from these drugs. And broadly, they're very, very well tolerated,
Yes,
for the most part, as long as you're not eating like a total asshole.
right.
Uh, if you're still trying to stuff your face with pizza, then yeah, you might have some GI
Your
upset.
stomach's gonna hurt. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're supposed to be, pairing it with better nutritional decisions where it helps you stick to your diet, so that you can, get where you're trying to go. And
And I think these drugs, like knowing, I think the general or average person knowing this will work if I put in these minimal lifestyle changes. I think it encourages them to finally make those changes.
yeah, it makes them comfortable making that leap. Uh,
Yes.
and it's also shown to decrease a lot of other impulsive behaviors like smoking, alcohol
I
abuse,
just talked about this
use
2
of
days
other
ago.
drugs.
It's been the biggest thing that I've gotten from it. I'm using 200 micrograms of Retrutitide a day.
Yeah,
So it's 1.4 milligrams.
yeah.
Um, and so I have no problem eating my meals. And I'm actually for being in a diet, I'm eating quite a bit of food compared to what I've done in the past. And when it's time to eat, I can eat, no problem.
Yeah.
However, I recently my coach told me to go out to eat with my girlfriend because my weight was coming down a little too fast, or even like something as simple as walking through the grocery store. I am a food person. I love shitty food. I love snacks. I love cereal.
You didn't get
Um,
big backs.
no, no. So there's times I'll walk through the grocery store with my girlfriend and make jokes like, can't wait for Compton to add muffins to the meal plan or something, right? I am numb to all of it. I'm robotic to it, where it has just completely turned my brain off to the thought of um, even like fantasizing about it. And then secondly, I used to be a abusive weed user,
Yeah.
and I have no interest in that either.
Yeah, that's awesome. Fuck yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's helping you make better health decisions. I mean, it only makes sense to
yeah,
to use it. It's a
yeah,
tool, anything else.
right.
Uh,
And these same people, man, even we're talking about the average person, but even within bodybuilding spaces, I see people shitting on it. Like, I
that's
had a guy leave a comment today. We talked about it on an episode a couple days ago. Some nameless, faceless schmo leaves a comment. If you need a GLP, bodybuilding isn't for you. I wanted to be like, how many shows have you done?
Right.
But
Yeah.
this guy leaves a comment on it, and that general sentiment is held by people I know that are competitive bodybuilders.
What's the
And
safety profile on GLPs versus something like trenbolone or
I
DMT
was,
or any
dude,
of
I
these?
was just gonna say these same bodybuilders that are saying that GLPs have no place in bodybuilding will shoot Chinese bathtub tren and put SEO in their arms.
No judgment to the guys doing that. I mean, I use,
None. There's no rules.
yeah,
Great.
exactly.
Use
So there
whatever you
should be
want.
no rules applied to GLP-1s too in the same regard. So
I'm with you.
especially if it's gone through the rigmarole of FDA approval, which they're way more selective than some of the other international health agencies as far as what they'll allow in some respects. The hate on GLP-1s and the people using them is absolutely unjustified, and I will defend those people to the death to use
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That's
Love to hear it.
I've seen it change lives. I mean, I've had
Yes.
handful of clients now lose 100 pounds. I mean, that's like these are guys, they're knocking on death's door and they didn't even realize it with how big they'd gotten. Um, so it's
They're basically buying back 15 or 20 years of their life,
easily,
you
easily.
know? So it's yeah, it's a shame, but I think people, anytime there's something new like this and it's groundbreaking, I think it rattles certain people that fear change. So it's like
Well, how long have scientists been working on this? GLP-1
10
technology
years at
has been
least.
around for 20 years. I mean,
Yeah.
liraglutide was around. That's a daily shot, and that was somewhat effective. But, the fact that they were able to lengthen that mechanism of action to make it a once weekly shot, which may not be ideal for semaglutide, but it certainly works for a lot of fucking people.
That and
Uh,
it keeps people adherent. Like in terms of the average person being on medicine and how successful medicine is for them, adherence is number one.
and we've been begging for a compound like this to come along for decades, and now we finally have it, and you're going to shit on
Yeah.
scientists and people using it? Like,
Right. All right. A couple more, couple quick hitters, quick answers, and then we'll let you go.
good.
So we already established generic GH is the best. Best piece of advice that you've ever been given.
Oh man. Uh, you'll never get a second chance to make a first impression.
Mm. Wow, very good. Okay.
The first one counts. That's just as far as generic advice goes. As far as fitness advice, I don't even know what I could
No,
chalk that
no,
up.
it's not fitness related. It's this is general life. That one's awesome. Worst piece of advice you've ever been given.
Uh, you shouldn't do cardio in your off season. It's the worst advice I've ever been told personally.
That's up there with mine as well, so I can relate. You can go back in time and tell your 18-year-old self one thing. What is it?
Oh man. Go talk to a therapist.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish I had done that probably 10 years sooner than I did.
Mm, okay. Okay. Very good.
Say
Yeah, yeah, we'll save that one for the next one after you win nationals. All right, man. Appreciate you a ton for coming on. Is there anything you wanted to plug? I know you had mentioned what's the peptide company again? I'm sorry. What's
Asylum. Yeah, Code Spencer at checkout saves 20%.
nice. Very nice. And then coaching wise, where can people get a hold of you?
You can find me on Instagram at Bodybuilding Chemist.
Awesome. Yeah,
Happy
I'll
to.
put the links for all that below. Spencer, really appreciate it, man. This was awesome. I feel like we could probably fill up some time with me just being a meathead and picking your brain. I'll keep it about an hour now. I'd love to have you back on. I think people are going to love this, and I think people are going to be excited at the opportunity to ask you questions again. So we will be in touch. But for Spencer, I'm Joseph. This was the One More Rep podcast. And until next week, we are out.